So today we're going to talk about accounts payable, and I did want to point out that I'm doing this webinar today in the 2018 version, also known as the 6.0 version of Sage 100. So a couple of the things that we'll talk about are new to this latest version, and I will point those out when we're talking about it. So to get started, we're going to go to our accounts payable module, and I'm going to start in the setup and cover a few things and point out some items in the accounts payable options. So the options that you have in accounts payable are unique to each company code. So you can have the setups and the various settings different on a company by company basis. So what we're going to look at first in the accounts payable options under the main tab, we're going to look at the aging categories. And out of the box, Sage is defaulted to age invoices by days, and it's set typically to 30, 60, 90, and 120 days. But you can modify these. So if you want to track your aging in AP based on a different schedule, you can set this up, and then when you do your AP invoice data entry based on your terms codes, it will actually use these aging categories. This is the ability to modify these fields is only available if you're using days. You also have the option to age by month, and you'll notice when you do that, it changes it to 1, 2, 3, and 4 months, but it grays out those fields and they cannot be modified. So you can change these dates, maybe run an aging report. If you decide that you don't like how these days are set up, then you can go in and modify them at any point in time. And then when you make those changes just by clicking accept, those go into effect. I also wanted to point out to you display invoices with zero balance. You know that in accounts payable, when you go into vendor maintenance and you look at your invoices tab, you can see all of the invoices in there if they've been paid, if they're still open, what the balance is, any debit memos or credit memos that have been entered. And if you do a lot of business with a vendor, that list can get very long. So you can choose not to display those zero balance invoices literally by unchecking this box. So it does not purge them from your history. It just no longer shows them on the screen. So, and we'll take a look when we go into vendor maintenance, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. And the same is with the option below where it says display cleared checks in vendor maintenance. You now, on your checks tab in vendor maintenance, you can let it know whether you want it to show whether a check has been cleared or not. And that ties into your accounts receivable module. So if you are using if you're using bank rec, let me step back, I apologize. This is applicable if you're using the bank rec module. So if you have this checked and are using bank reconciliation as you clear checks, it is then going to show up on the checklist in vendor maintenance that those checks have been cleared. Okay, on the right side here, we've all just gone through year end, and I wanted to make everyone aware that Sage will track your 1099 information, and you also can print your 1099s and manage all of that through Sage and Atrix. So if you are wanting to manage 1099 reporting, the first thing that you have to do is check this box. And then you also want to make sure that when you're starting out from, if you haven't utilized this feature before, that you're starting out with a proper year so that it's tracking your history correctly. When I talk to clients, we have a lot of clients that do not, either they don't do 1099s, maybe they should be doing them, but they haven't been doing them. Or I've had some folks that say that they maintain them or manage them outside of Sage. And there's really no need to manage it outside of Sage or to have a different type of software do the 1099s for you. So if you're basing that decision on several years ago where maybe the data was incorrect. It would have to do with you not purging out the 1099 history promptly, and that purging has been enhanced over the past 2 or 3 prior versions, and there really is no reason why you should not be managing your 1099s in the system if you have vendors that require 1099s. So I did want to point that out to you. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to move on to the Additional tab. And I want to talk to you about the field on the right where it says the days to retain paid invoices. With Sage, when you do a period end processing in a module, it will go out and look at some of your setup options to determine how long you want to maintain history. In some instances, if you're maintaining summary history or if you're maintaining detailed history. In Accounts Payable, it's asking how long you want to retain paid invoices. And on the main tab, we looked at displaying those zero balance invoices, which will show up for a very long time. This is asking you, when you do a period in processing at the end of a month, at what point do you want those old historical paid invoices to purge out of your system? And this is set to 99 days. The maximum number of days that you can retain it is 999. My suggestion when I set up anyone in Sage is that you keep that history for the maximum number of days. And then at any point, if you realize that's too much history, you can go in and change this number, and the next time you do period in processing, it will purge up to those number of days. What you don't want to do is have someone go in and change this to 0 days and then do period in processing, because literally then it is going to purge out all of your paid invoices, even if it was an invoice that was just paid last month. So you want to be aware of this. And with that, a lot of the things that we're looking at today in the setup, and also we're going to review the utilities, please make sure that you're reviewing the role maintenance in Sage and who has access to what, because not everyone should have access to be able to get into these setup screens. So just make sure that you're monitoring that and that you know who has access to get in and make applicable changes and who's not allowed to get in. Okay. The next item we're going to look at is under the Entry tab. And we're going to look down here at the bottom left, and we have Enable Expense Distribution Tables. This feature was added a couple of versions ago where you can actually build in another setup screen distribution tables, so that let's say that you have multiple divisions and you want to be able to expense your utility bill across all of those divisions, different GL account numbers, and have a percentage go to each of those account numbers. Instead of having to manually do all of that line entry every time you get your utility bill or you get, your the leases on your vehicles or your rent, you can have it break out that distribution table to save you a lot of keystrokes. So if you're wanting to do this, you can set up the tables, and then it would be used on an invoice by invoice basis. So it doesn't have to be used on every single invoice, just those where you have multiple distribution lines on a recurring basis. So if you're wanting to use those distribution tables, you're going to check this box. And then the next question is going to be, do you allow the distribution to be less than 100%? And if this is checked, then if your distribution is less than 100%, then you can change those values, or you can add additional lines. If this is not checked, then those distribution lines will be required to equal 100%. And again, I'll show you one of those. We'll go through an invoice data entry and pull in one of the tables that we've created so that you can see how that works. And the other thing that I wanted to show you will be reason codes, and that's a little bit further down in the setup. So, Jody, if anyone has any questions on anything that I've shown them in the accounts payable options, let me know, or folks, just feel free to submit a question.
No questions yet.
Okay, thank you. So what we're going to look at we're still going to remain under the setup, and we're going to go in and look at the expense distribution table maintenance. Now, since I checked that box in the options, I'm able to open this field, and I've set up two tables just to show an example. One was for rent, and basically my scenario is that I'm paying rent on my office building, but I want to expense it to various departments. So what I've done is I created a table called rent, gave it a description, and then I actually filled in the GL account numbers and what percentage of my rent is going to be expensed into what account number. I created another one called trucks, and this was where, and you can see I didn't fill in any percentages here, but if I'm using this distribution table, when I go to do my data entry, it will bring in these account numbers, and then I can manually fill in the amounts. So again, I'll show you an example of how to do this. You can create as many expense tables as you want to in this area. So wanted to show you that feature. And then the other thing that I wanted to show you in the setup is something that they've added recently, which is the inactive reason code maintenance. And this is a kind of a global field. So the inactive reason codes affect AP as well as AR. So now in vendor maintenance, you can make a vendor inactive and then give it a reason code to say why it's inactive. You know, they're out of business. You know, their pricing is too high. You don't want to use them any longer. If there's a reason for that, bad product, anything of that nature. But you can now manage that, and then you have the same functionality in accounts receivable to make a customer inactive as well. So that covers what we're going to talk about in the setup today. And Jody, any questions?
Pam? Yes, we do have some questions related to expense distribution. First one is, can you use the distribution of invoices if you use job cost?
That is a good question, and I believe the answer to that is no. But I will, if you will make a note on who that is, I will confirm that. But I'm pretty sure that it is not compatible with job cost. As I recall, that's the one limitation.
Okay, I'll make a note of that and contact them separately. Okay. Next question is, where do you use the expense distribution table? Can it be used in invoice data entry?
Yes, it can be, and I'm going to show them that shortly. We're going to actually go into invoice data entry, and I'm going to show them the examples of both of those tables that I have, one that has the percentages completed and one that had 0 percentages. So it is done on the invoice data entry level. It is not tied to a vendor per se, and I will show them that. That is part of the presentation today.
Okay, so one last question before we move on. Is there any way to set an option to have the invoice comment appear on the check?
Yes, and let me make a note of that. When we get into, whoever asked that question, when we get into the invoice data entry, I will point that out and confirm that that's the comment field that you're referring to. and then I can let you know what needs to be done with that. I just want to, before I answer it, I want to make sure that we're talking about the same field. But yes, the short answer is yes, it can be done regardless of where the comment is, and it's managed through Crystal Report and adding that field to your form. But I just want to make sure that we're looking at the same comment field. So
Okay,
Jody, don't forget that when I get into invoice data entry.
Okay, perfect. Okay. One more question before we move on. Customers stating they have many inactive vendors due to age and duplicate records. Is there a way to hide them from showing in vendor lookups if they're inactive?
Yes. Now, the question that I have for them is, are they truly making them inactive by checking the box that they're inactive? And actually, let me go ahead and go into vendor maintenance so that we can talk about that a little bit more. It depends on how they're considering them inactive. And then also later in the presentation, we're also going to be talking about how to manage if you have the same vendor in your system multiple times, how to merge those vendors, and also how to actually delete and remove old vendors if you want them removed from your system. So we're going to be talking about that as well today.
Okay, and that is a continuation of this question. They responded that, yes, they are inactivating them by going into vendor maintenance and making them inactive, but they also want to make sure that if they remove inactive vendors in the utilities, does that erase past transactions?
Okay, all right. Yes, we will, if they can bear with me a little bit, that is something that we are going to be talking about a little bit later on in the presentation. I think it will answer their questions, and then if not, I'll be glad to answer any additional ones.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, everyone. Really good questions. So what we're going to look at for a few minutes are a couple of the various things in vendor maintenance. And one of the features that they added, I believe it was in the 2017 version, is the where you have autofill. So when you're going in, you obviously can do a lookup and see your vendor list. You also can start typing in the older versions and click your magnifying glass to do a lookup. But in the new versions, you can actually start typing, and it will bring up anything that starts with the letters that you start typing in, and then you can actually then select that vendor. So that is another feature that is there to save you some time. I want to use this first vendor for my example in the beginning, though. So you can autofill the name when you're doing the lookup in Accounts Payable. The other thing that they have added with 2018 is the ability to do spell check in various areas. So the spell check functionality is global within Sage, and it can be used for memos, which we're going to talk a little bit about memo code maintenance shortly. So there's spell check in there. You can also do spell check for messages that print on your forms, such as your AP checks, that you can use spell check for that. In Paperless Office, your electronic delivery, you can have it spell check there. Your comments fields, it can spell check. Notes that you put in vendor contact maintenance, the functionality is there. If you're doing test email or test fax through your company maintenance setup, spell check is available there. And also, if you're adding a multi-line user-defined field to a screen, you can select to enable spell check to that, so that when your team is filling in that user-defined field kind of free form, that you can have that spell checked as well if you want to. So we'll look at the vendor memo shortly, and then I'll show you how the spell check works in there. Wanted to just show you a couple of things here on the main screen in vendor maintenance. This reference field, a lot of people don't really know what that's for, but this is a field that you can add to your accounts payable check form. So some people may use this reference to say, you know, utility bill, water bill, something of that nature. But you can add this to the check form to print. It does not automatically print if you fill this in. So if you have a different way that you want to use this reference code for some type of internal tracking, you certainly can do that as well. If the vendor is a credit card vendor, you can check this box. So if you have Visa, American Express, Discover set up as a vendor in your Sage, you can say that they are a credit card vendor, and then when you get your invoice from American Express, if you need to transfer that payment history to a different vendor, you can do that through invoice data entry, and I'll show you that as well. That's kind of confusing to explain, but for instance, let's say that you are working with a vendor and they are subject to a 1099, but you pay them by American Express. When you're keying in that American Express invoice, you can transfer that invoice to Oasis Solutions, and it will put the history under Oasis. It will track the 1099 information, but when you go to cut a check, the check will be made payable to American Express. So it doesn't double any expenses. It's more of a historical tracking so that you can track the purchases that you've made with an individual vendor. So hopefully I didn't make that too confusing. The other thing is hold payment. There are three that I can think of ways to hold a payment in Sage. You can do it at the vendor level, and if this box is checked, I can continue working with this vendor. I can continue doing invoice data entry on this vendor, but when I go to select invoices for payment, it is not going to put them on the list because I say that I'm holding payment. I can also do this at the invoice data entry level. So maybe I don't have a problem with the vendor as a whole, but one of the purchases that I've made, I do have an issue with, and I want to make sure that my AP clerk does not pay that invoice until I've resolved the issue. So I can put the invoice on hold during AP invoice data entry. I can also go in and put the invoice on hold after invoice data entry. So if I determine after the fact that I need to put the invoice on hold, I can do that as well. So if it's in this area, it is on hold vendor level, and then again, you can do it on an invoice by invoice basis. But if you're doing the invoice payment selection to determine who you're going to pay, if a vendor is on hold and or particular invoices are on hold, they are not going to show up on your payment selection until they are taken off hold. So it's built in so that you do not accidentally pay that vendor. Okay.
Pam?
So yes.
Quick question. Is there a report to show which items are marked as hold payment?
Yes. I'm making a note here so that we can look at that. But yes, there is a report that you can run to see whether the invoices are on hold, and also we should be able to look at a report for the vendors that are on hold as well. So yes, I will make a note of that.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, what we're going to take a look at while we're just on the main screen in vendor maintenance is we're going to look at this little note field up here, which is the memo field. And most of you are probably familiar with memos. They are throughout Sage 100 in various modules. This one is specifically related to vendor maintenance. If the little icon is yellow, that means that there are existing memos for this vendor. If you go to a vendor and you see that it's grayed out, that's an indication that no memos have been set up to date for that particular vendor. So we're going to go back to Airway Properties, and I'm going to click on this. And then you can actually see that there's one memo that exists, or we can create new memos. So the memos could be used on anything from maybe you have special instructions for this vendor when you're placing an order. Maybe you want to make sure that there's always the vendor always requires a purchase order. Maybe the vendor requires a down payment. A lot of our clients use this to manage the getting W-9 forms from their vendors to see who's subject to a 1099 and who isn't. So if you were using this to track W-9s, you would give it a new memo code, and you're limited to the number of characters, and I would make it simple and call it W-9. And any vendor that you're setting up, use the exact same code because you can actually run reports from this. So if you have the same code, you can run reports for the memo code equal to W-9. And sign form. And then what we might do is maybe this is a brand new vendor, and you can see I can't type on demand, spoke with Jody, and requested the W-9. So I can actually set up a reminder date if I want to make sure that I've received that W-9 from Jody. So we'll go ahead and put in that date. Let me make sure, yeah, okay, I did format it correctly. And we could put in a reminder date as well. I'll show you that report real quickly in just a moment. But the other thing that's nice about this is, so let's say that Jody does send me the W-9 form. I can scan that, and if I have an electronic copy, I can actually attach it in here. So if you're going through any kind of an audit, and the auditor says, you know, can I see the W-9 form for Airway Property? Instead of having to go to their file, try to dig it out and find it, you can actually have it attached right here within your Sage 100. To the best of my knowledge, you can only attach one document per memo code. But as far as the W-9, you should not have to worry about that. If somebody issues a new form, then you can just attach the most current one. So then you would just click accept, and notice how that gave the red underline. That's my spell check. So if I typed in and misspelled requested, then you'll notice that it underlines it for me. And if I do a right click, it will give me some options where I could either add the word to the dictionary. I spelled request so badly it can't find request, but let's just say I make it a little closer to the real word. So then you can see where it does give me that option. And if I realize that I've made a typo, I can click here and it actually changes it for me. So this is a really, really good feature. And again, those areas that I talked about earlier, those are the areas where Sage 100 has added that functionality. But in the memo codes is one of those. And memo code meaning global. So if you put memos in on your customers, as well as your vendors, as well as inventory items and the GL, the functionality is in all of those. So I'm just going to go ahead and click accept. And now if I do a lookup, you're going to see both of those memos exist on this vendor. Again, it's vendor by vendor, so if I go to my next vendor, you can see that these are different. The other thing that you can do, let me go back just a second, because you all also probably noticed that I had, when I went to one of those vendors, the memo popped up. If I go back to here, I can tell it to auto display this always, or when it gets to the reminder date. If I say always to this, then anytime I go into this vendor, just go back, that memo is actually going to pop up. So that can add a lot of keystrokes if you have too many of those popping up. But if it's something very important that you want to make sure that maybe whoever's doing your purchase orders or anything related to this vendor, that these memos are popping up, then you set that in the form maintenance, memo maintenance for auto display. And then again, if you don't ever want it to show up, you just want to track it, then you're just going to set it to never. And let me show a couple of quick things, and then I see that we do probably have some more questions, Jody. I'm going to go to the additional tab real quickly, and this is where you can make a vendor inactive or temporary. You've always had the ability to make them temporary but not inactive, and it tells me that this vendor cannot be changed to inactive, and if I want to see the list of reasons why, I can click on details. So I'm going to click on the details, and it says, hey, you have a repetitive invoice out there for that vendor, and also you have open POs. So before it's going to allow me to make a vendor inactive, I can't have any open invoices out there. I can't have any open POs. I can't have an open balance to make them inactive. And when we get into the utilities, if you're actually wanting to merge or delete vendors, again, they can't have anything open before you get rid of them. You have to make sure that they have a zero balance and there's nothing open on them. But if they didn't have those open POs and repetitive invoice, when I change it to inactive, then I could put in the reason code of why I'm making them inactive. So I wanted to show that very quickly, and two more things, and I will get to everyone's questions. We have a box here that says separate check. What that box does is if you check it at the vendor level, no matter how many invoices you have for that vendor, when you go and select those invoices for payment, it's going to put each invoice on a separate check. Most people do not want to do that, but that's what this box does. You also can do it at the invoice data entry level. If you did have a particular invoice that you wanted to not include with another check run, and you wanted just that invoice on a check by itself, you can also do it on at the invoice data entry level. So, and then if you are tracking 1099 history, this is where you're going to set up the information about whether they're a business or an individual. The default form, Sage manages miscellaneous interest and dividends, and then you fill out their information. What I'm going to do in the interest of time, instead of spending a lot of time on this, I'll address the questions and we'll move on. And then if we have time at the end and anyone's interested in this a little bit further, I'll be glad to go through that. So, Jody, I'll open it up to questions.
I'm trying to answer somebody's question regarding the attachments in the memo fields. The question was, does it upload the document from both the desktop and the server? And I'm in the middle of answering this. The attachment is not actually uploaded into Sage 100. It's simply a hyperlink to wherever that file is located.
Thank you, Jody.
So if you move the file at a later date, you're not going to be able to access that attachment. You would need to update the hyperlink to wherever that file is located.
Correct. And you would have to think about that if you have a server move and everything isn't set up exactly the same. But yes. Thank you for answering that, Jody.
You're welcome.
Someone had a question about inactive vendors. So we're showing this, and then I said we are going to get into the utilities on how to merge and delete vendors. So did that answer how this works in the vendor maintenance? And then we'll look at the utilities later. So if between those two it doesn't address the attendee's question, just have them let us know, and I can go into more information offline with them.
Thank you.
Okay. And let's see. The other thing, just very quickly in here, we're going to move over to the Invoices tab. And I just wanted to show you on the Invoices tab, this is where you're going to see all of your invoices. We obviously are seeing zero balance invoices, but if you remember in the setup, you do have the box where I could have checked to not show them, and you wouldn't be seeing any of these invoices that have a zero balance. I also wanted to show you that if you click on an invoice that has been paid, or maybe there have been adjustments to the invoice or debit memos or credit memos applied to that invoice, if you click on the invoice, you can see the detail in the bottom of the screen. Or if you go to the Transactions tab, it's actually going to show them all on an individual basis. So for instance, here you can see where the invoice was entered, and then right below that you see the payment. So instead of drilling down on the invoice and seeing it at the bottom of the screen, this shows you everything. And here is the column to show whether or not the check is cleared. So we talked in the setup that you could have it show cleared checks. This is where it will show if, yes, it has cleared, and if it did, it will actually then show you the date that you cleared it. So I wanted to show that feature as well. And that pretty much covers what I was going to talk about in vendor maintenance. So if there's any questions specifically related to vendor maintenance, let me know, Jody.
Yes, we have one. Somebody is trying to inactivate vendors, but if the vendor has any inventory items in the history, they are not able to inactivate them. Is there a way around that?
And they just have items in their history, but there's nothing open on the vendor?
Yes.
And did you say inventory items?
Yes.
Okay. All right. That is one that I'm going to have to look at offline, but I can follow up with them if you'll make a note, Jody, of who that is and
Will
answer
do. Thank you.
And have to do a little research on that one. And just to clarify, if they can just answer to you that they are trying to make them inactive through vendor maintenance and not trying to delete them through the utility. So if they can just follow up with you on that, Jody, just to clarify so that I point them in the proper direction, okay?
Okay. And one more question. Related to the transaction screen that you're showing, does that screen have to be enabled as an option? They don't actually see anything on the transaction screen.
No, it does not have to be enabled. So make a note of who that is, and we will follow up with them. There's nothing coming to my mind at the moment as to why they would not see that screen. The Invoices and Transaction tab, having that ability, has been around for several versions.
They've clarified that they do see the invoices, but not the checks.
Okay.
That was in a later version, is that not right? That the checks were added to the transaction screen?
I don't.
The check numbers, I mean.
Right. I think it's been around for a while. If you will make a note of who that is, I will follow up with them, because it possibly could be version related, or it could be something else that they have set up, either through custom office or something where they're hiding that.
Okay, will do. Thank you. No other questions right now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to exit out of vendor maintenance. And the next thing that we're going to talk about are the utilities. And the first thing that I want to tell you about the utilities is that for most of these features, you want to be very careful. You want to limit who has access to even be able to get into these utilities, because once you perform one of these utilities, there is no undo button. So if you merge 50 vendors into one by accident, the only way to undo that is to restore from a backup. So limit who has access, and I'm going to show you right now where you can do that. So in the library master module, under main, under role maintenance, so this is where you set up the roles and then assign those roles to your users. In role maintenance, you are going to, I'm going to just grab a role here, and we are going to look at accounts payable. If this box is checked under AP, then it means anything that is listed under here, they have access to. So it's kind of a global, if it's listed, they have access to it. So if you go under accounts payable and then go under miscellaneous tasks, this is where those utilities are listed. There's other things listed in here as well, but for instance, the delete and change vendors, the purging of history, the purging of, temporary vendors, removing voided checks, all of those different things. There's a whole list of them here. The way this is set up, I have access to do every single one of these. So if you want to make sure that only the manager has the ability to delete vendors, then you would uncheck that box. And then if someone goes in there, even by accident, just, good intentions trying to clean things up, it's not going to allow them to do anything. So that's the first thing I would check, is to see who has access to those utilities. And it is module specific. So if your staff, if you have someone that does the accounts receivable, they also could accidentally merge customers and delete customers. So you need to look under the role maintenance for AR. You can do the same utilities in the general ledger and in inventory and so forth. So the only saving grace is it will not let you delete something that has current history or activity. But as far as merging, it will allow you to do that. So we're gonna take a look at this, and I'm going to show you kind of what to watch for and how to be careful. But I have had clients call me on the AP side and the AR side where they accidentally merged. Someone merged all of their customers into one by accident. And so what that does is it combines all of your history, all of your invoices, everything, and puts it under one vendor. And they did not have a backup. So that was a very, very bad situation that took them a very long time to recover from, and they never fully recovered. They just kind of had to rebuild what they could. So If it sounds like I'm trying to scare you, I am, because I really don't want anybody to have to go through that. So what we're going to talk about right now that I see needed most frequently in accounts payable is the delete and change vendor. And I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier. What I see a lot of is that, maybe you've had multiple people, AP clerks, and they can't find Oasis, so they set up Oasis Solutions. And then they set up Oasis Computer Solutions. So you look and you see Oasis in there 3 times. There's invoices on all of them, and you don't want to get rid of any of them, but you only need Oasis to be in there once. So what you're going to do in order to merge vendors is this is the delete feature, and this is the change feature. So I'll give you an example of, let's say that Airway Properties is actually the same as Stevens Supply. Maybe they changed their name 3 years ago and we just didn't catch it, and we want to merge Airway Properties into Stevens Supply. So my starting vendor number, the correct way is that my starting vendor is Airway and my ending vendor is Airway. And actually in the newer versions, it populates it for you so that you don't actually have to select it. The new vendor would be Stevens Supply. So what this is saying is, I want to start with vendor Airway, I want to end with vendor Airway, and I want to actually merge them into Stevens. If I accidentally wasn't paying attention and I did my starting vendor as Airway and my ending vendor as Steve and put the new vendor as Steve, it will take every vendor from here through here and merge it into one. So if you look at the list, all of these vendors above here are all going to get merged into Stevens Supply. So that's where you want to be extremely careful. Then you can go on and make make as many changes here as you need to. And what I suggest to folks is, once you've made this selection, is that you can print it out, and I would have somebody just double check you, because we all get in a hurry. So just have somebody double check, make sure that you've done it properly. And then once you're ready and you feel comfortable with everything that's in there, then you're going to click the proceed. So if you look at this and go, oh my gosh, I made a mistake, just click on the line and do the delete right here, and it removes it from your selection. So, so there's no problem if you have 50 items on here and you realize one is wrong. You don't have to cancel the whole thing and start over. You can just delete on a line-by-line basis. Or you could go back to that line and correct it, reprint it, have someone else proof it for you. Deleting is you're going to have the starting and ending vendor, and basically it's going to delete all the files. If you have open invoices, open POs, anything of that nature, if you have a balance on the vendor, let's say that it shows you have an open balance of 25 cents and you know you're never going to pay that, it's going to require you to adjust that balance off before you can delete it. So the only thing that will save you is if you're in delete and there's something open on the vendor, it will not delete that particular vendor. And you get a report afterwards so you would know which ones it didn't delete. On the change, when you're merging, it assumes that you've made the correct selection and it lets you go. The other thing that you can do is, let me set this one up improperly again. I don't think they have that anymore. You used to be able to actually expand this out where you could see the detail of everything that was included in that, but they may have removed that and it may just show up on your report. So, so Jody, I see that we have more questions, so I'm going to hush for a second and let you ask those questions.
Actually, we don't have any additional questions, but apparently one of our attendees has lost audio. But I can still hear you and no one else has mentioned it, so I think we're good to go.
Okay, all right, well, thank you. Okay.
Oh,
all right.
We have a question. Can you rename a vendor?
Yes, you can rename it. Actually, let me clarify that. Changing the name of a vendor is done through vendor maintenance. If you're wanting to renumber a vendor, meaning change the vendor number, then you can go through a renumber feature through vendor maintenance, or just create that new vendor number, what you want it to be, and then do this change, and then that's how the change will take effect. So if Oasis changed our name to Pam and Jody's Solutions, then you could create the vendor Pam and Jody's Solutions, and then go into this change, and you would pick Oasis as your starting and ending, and the new vendor would be Pam and Jody, and then that does essentially the renumbering of the vendor. If they're just changing the name, let me get rid of this. If they're just changing the name here and they don't really care about renumbering, then they can just change this within vendor maintenance. But I have a feeling they're probably talking about the vendor number. Okay. All right, what we're going to do now, and I do apologize, we're running a little bit long, but I really do appreciate the questions. Lots of really good questions today. I want to very quickly go into invoice data entry, and I'm going to show you how that expense list works. So I'm going to go into, and I think this will answer 3 or 4 of the questions we had earlier. So I'm going to go into invoice data entry. I'm just going to grab a vendor, make up an invoice number. I'm still going to put in the total amount. So let's say the invoice is $1,000. Here is where you're going to select your distribution table. So if I know what it is, I can type it in, or if I do a lookup, let's say this one is for rent, and I believe the rent one had percentages in the field. When I go to my lines tab, it actually brings in all of those numbers and the percentage that I had set up on that table. If for some reason on this particular invoice, I really don't want to expense to this account number, I can remove it. I just have to make sure that my total of my distribution equals the total of the invoice. So I would either have to modify one of these numbers, or I could add other numbers. So if I add, let's see, we'll make that one 280. I think that brings us, so I could just change that total, and then it brings me into balance. If I do another invoice, and it is for $350, and I want to do the truck expense table. See, that one I left all my percentages blank, so it brings in the account numbers, and then I can fill in the amount. So if this one is, $30, and this one is $250, and this one is $70, and I don't need this one, I can just highlight it again and delete the line. And if I don't need the top one, I can delete it as well. And then accept it. So this is where the distribution table, so you set up your tables first, and then you can select it when you do an invoice, and it will bring that in. And if I do Airway Properties, and I leave this blank when I go to my Lines tab, now this has a GL account number that is pulling from right here. If I find a vendor that doesn't have a GL account number, yeah, they all do. So let me just change this. Accept it. Go back to invoice date entry. Then it brings it up blank. So it's not pulling anything from vendor maintenance either, and then I just select the account number or type it in and expense it to as many lines as I need to. So the question that we had earlier is someone asked if there was a way to get this comment field on the check. So I want to confirm that they're talking about, I want to know if they're talking about this comment field or this comment field. And if you want to address that later, if you don't get an answer right away, Jody, if you have the person's...
Is that either one would be fine?
Okay, okay. That is done at the AP check level, and you have to tell it to print those comment fields. I do not have Crystal installed on this particular version, but if you've noted their name, Jody, I will follow up with them with some more details, if that's okay with them.
Yes, and they provided more information. An example would be to include their utilities account number on the check form.
Okay, so they want to print the GL account numbers on the check?
I don't think they mean the GL account number. I think they mean the vendor's account number for them. Like if they're paying an LG&E bill, they want to include their LG&E account number on the payment.
Gotcha. Okay, yes. Yes, in the interest of time, I will follow up with them offline, because you typically will just have one account number for that. That is also where under vendor maintenance, that reference field that I said that you can have print on the checks. It's not a real long field, but this also can be used because this reference field can be printed on the checks. You have to add it to the check, but that is also what this field can be used for. If you run into a situation where your account number that you want to reference is 60 characters long, then an option to that would be through Custom Office to create a user-defined field so that you could fill in that account number, and then also that user-defined field could be linked and added to your AP check. So,
and Pam, is there also a standard field for that under the additional tab? I've seen quite a few customers have it in there as that comment.
In this comment,
right.
They may use it there. I will have to check. I'm not sure if that field can be pulled into it to a check form. It can be pulled into reports, but I'm not sure that it can be pulled onto a check form.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so just give me that person's name and contact information after the session, and I'll provide that.
Will do. Thank you very much. We don't have any other questions right now.
Oh, okay. Well, then we have like 1 minute left, so I'm going to let's see. One other thing I'll just show you very quickly, and then we will end the session because we are right at 3 o'clock, is just want to make sure that everyone knows that anywhere that you have a lookup in Sage where you have the magnifying glass, that this report, or excuse me, this screen can be customized so that you could see other pieces of information. And also, this list can be exported out to Excel. So if someone wanted to just see, you know, a list of your vendors and their addresses, for instance, you could go into Custom, and do vendor addresses. I'm not going to make it my default view. I'm going to click next. It brings up all of the fields that are listed here. The only thing that I cannot remove is the vendor number, but I can go in and remove this information. And then I can go back and add their address line, their city, their state, their country code, their zip code, and actually I don't need the country code. So I can do this. I could click on next. I could say that I want to make sure if I had the status column in there, I could set it up so that the status is only equal to active, so it doesn't pull in inactive customers. I'm just going to finish this in the sake of time so that you can see that it pulled this information in. And then if I want to put this into Excel, all I need to do is click my Excel icon, assuming I have Excel on my workstation. And what it's going to do then is it actually exported that information directly out to Excel. So you can do that, again, anywhere in Sage where you have the custom lookup, you have that, that ability. So we'll go back here. Again, just kind of wanted to briefly go over that. So I want to thank everyone for their time today. I know we ran through this pretty quickly, but we had a lot of really good questions, so I hope you all found that it was informative. And I will follow up with those that need follow-up after the session. If you have any additional questions, you're interested in upgrading your Sage, anything at all, you feel free to email me at pam@oasisky.com, and I will be glad to answer any questions I can. If it's anything that needs to be passed along to another member of the team, I'll be glad to do that as well. And on that note, I think we'll go ahead and end the session. Is there anyone else that's asked a question, Jody?
We did have one request. Was wondering if we're going to do a webinar in the future that covers repetitive invoice entry in accounts payable.
I will make a note of that. And we will get something on the books to handle the repetitive invoice entry. Thank you for that suggestion.
Okay, no other questions other than the ones that we need to follow up on offline. So
okay.
Thank you very much today, Pam.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed today's session. And we have one again, the next one is in April, on April the 11th, and we're going to be talking about accounts receivable tips and tricks that day. So feel free to join us. This session is also being recorded, and the recordings will be made available on our website within a couple of days. So everyone should be getting a link to that as well. So thank you all very much. And